Hey everyone, it's Heather Nichols. I have a really beautiful floral card that I created with the Layer It die collections, the new Layer It Rustic Floral and the Layer It Daisy die collection. I wanted to play around with creating my own pattern papers to use with these dies, so I have more of a textural and tonal look versus using just plain different colors of cardstock. So I'm using the Tailored Expressions watercolor cardstock and I'm painting onto it with the liquid watercolors. First, I'm doing a wash of water over the top of the watercolor cardstock using a flat brush. I'm doing this so it's not too wet, and I just want the watercolors to flow on the paper just so I get an overall watercolor wash look. The other thing I'm trying to do is to create some different shades of color. So some lighter shades and some darker shades so I can layer the die cut pieces in the different shades of colors. Sometimes to do this, I'm adding different colors in with the original liquid watercolors that I'm using. For example, I started off with a pineapple liquid watercolor and I added just a drop of the candy corn liquid watercolor to get that just a bit darker oranger tone that you can see me painting on the watercolor cardstock right now. I also did some spattering and adding speckles with the watercolors. Some of them I spattered while the watercolor paper was still wet, so they did a little bleeding and splotching. And I also used my heat tool to dry the watercolors in between, because then when I did some spattering and splotching, the color didn't move as much and I have some more defined splotches and splatters on my paper. Okay, so I have this yellow paper just about finished up. I'm going to dry it with my heat tool and then I'm going to move on and do a few more colors for this project. We're going to do a reddish color and a green color for leaves and also a brown and brownish red color. I'll zoom through creating the additional colors and then we'll start die cutting the pieces for our project. Here are my 4 completed pattern papers that I created with liquid watercolors to use on this project. And now I'm going to die cut out the different Layer It dies to create the flowers and leaves for the card. Once I have all of the die cut pieces cut out, I'm using the liquid adhesive, the multi-medium matte, to attach all of the flower elements together. I'm using the Shiplap background to stamp on a piece of sugar cube cardstock as the background on my card base. I'm setting the background stamp into my MISTI and then I close the lid to pick up the stamp onto the lid of the MISTI. I just put a little bit of adhesive on the back of the sugar cube cardstock to hold it in place into the MISTI while I'm stamping the background. Once I have the cardstock in place, I'm using toffee ink to ink up the Shiplap background. Once the stamp is all inked up, I'll close the lid of my MISTI and apply some pressure to stamp the image onto the sugar cube cardstock. Once I have the background all stamped with that Shiplap background, it's time to arrange the flowers onto my project. Figuring out an arrangement like this on your project, I think, is one of the things that can take the longest. I'll sit and push things around back and forth and back and forth for quite a while before I get it exactly the way that I like. Once you do get everything the way that you want it, you can use the press and seal trick to hold everything together so that you can attach it to your project in exactly the same way as you spent all that time arranging it. Lay the press and seal sticky side down over the top of your arrangement and firmly press all the different pieces so everything is attached to the press and seal in one group. Once you have that all done, then pick it up and set it aside. Next, I'm going to stamp a sentiment from the hand-lettered sentiment set onto my project. At first I was going to choose the thank you sentiment, but as I was holding it over the area I wanted to stamp in, it just didn't fit right. So I picked the choose joy one instead because it fit a lot better. I have the sentiment stamp just setting on that background, and I'm just going to lift that piece up and set it right into my MISTI so that it's stamped exactly where I want it to go. I'll hold everything in place with the bar magnet in the MISTI, and then I'll close the lid of the MISTI to pick up the stamp. I'm lifting the MISTI up just to look at how the stamp is aligned and just adjusting it so that everything is stamping in the correct position. I'm using toffee ink to ink up the sentiment, and when I have the stamp all inked up, I'll close the lid of the MISTI and stamp the sentiment onto the shiplap background. I'm going to ink up the stamp one more time and stamp it again so I have a dark and crisp color for the sentiment. Next, I'll add the stamped background to a toffee card base. I'm going to line up the top edge of the background with the top edge of the card, and I have it trimmed just a little bit so just a little peak of toffee shows at the bottom of the card. Next, I'm going to attach the die-cut flower arrangement. I'm adding adhesive to the back of the assembled flowers and leaves, making sure that I get adhesive where I need it to go. Next, I'll flip the press and seal so I can add the arrangement right to my project. I'm going to peel back the press and seal, and ideally everything is going to stay where it's supposed to stay. Sometimes it moves, but it's not too hard to make an adjustment. And then once I have the press and seal off, I kind of fuss with all of the little details. I have a few overlapping pieces that go off the edge of the card, and I'm using a pair of scissors just to trim those even with that piece of cardstock. I'll do the same with the elements that are going off the edge on the other side of the card. For a final finishing touch, I'm adding a little bit of sparkle to this card using a few sequins from the Snow Flurries sequin collection. I'm going to arrange them and attach them in place with liquid adhesive. That completes this project using the Layer It Rustic Floral and Layer It Daisy dies to create this really pretty farmhouse floral card. You can find the supplies that I used to create this card at tailoredexpressions.com. Thanks for joining me today, everybody. I'll see you next time.